Hey everybody, thanks for joining me tonight to launch my new book, The Doll Room. I only have a proof copy right now, but I'll have more tomorrow in stock. Yay! I know that it's Thursday night football, so I really appreciate anyone who's on helping me launch this book and hanging out for my reading and everything. So go Broncos. I hope I don't lose anybody by saying that, but if I do, I mean, it is what it is. Okay, so to start off, if you comment while I am talking tonight or ask any questions, every time you comment or question, you will get an entry into a giveaway for a free copy of The Doll Room, the ebook version. So keep the questions coming, keep the comments coming while we're going along. I'm going to try to keep this to an hour because I know there might be people on the East Coast or even in Europe, maybe my friend Poppy's on, I don't know, who are tuning in tonight. So for your first entry into the giveaway, if you just want to drop in the comments where you're tuning in from, that would be awesome. And then I can see how far and wide we are tonight. Okay, if there's time at the end, I'm a project manager, so I have an agenda here. If there's time at the end, we will do some questions and answers. Okay, and the last bit, which is very exciting, if you stay until the very end, I know that's a lot to ask, but if you do, you all get a special bonus at the end. So stay tuned for that. More to come. Let's get on with it. So, The Doll Room. This is my proof copy, like I said, but this won't be on there when you get yours. So, about the book, 2020 sucks, right? Am I right? Am I right? Say yeah, and you'll get another entry into the giveaway. Go ahead. My 2020 started out by getting a concussion, as a lot of you probably know. And it got a little better in February because my book, The Blood of Seven, was a finalist for a Colorado Book Award. I didn't win, but it's still a huge honor to be a finalist because it's a huge deal in Colorado to be part of that whole award. And then I was getting brain treatments and had a really bad one that left me kind of angry and sad. But I pushed through and persevered and wrote like 30 plus stories for this book. Some of them by hand because in the beginning of the concussions stage, I couldn't look at screens, so I had to write by hand, and it was great. It was a step away from my usual, typey that I do, and I type really fast, so it was kind of nice to slow down a little bit and really choose the right words the first time around instead of just throwing out a bunch of rubbish and then cleaning it up later. So I persevered and made it through because, to quote the musical artist AJR, when life hands you lemons, at least it gave you something. All right, so on to the good stuff now. I'm going to read 2 stories tonight from The Doll Room, and after each one, I'll pause and talk about how the story came to be or a little bit about the background of the story or something like that. So let me take a drink of water from my favorite scary mug. It says red rum. Red rum. Okay, I'm going to read the title story, The Doll Room. My grandma had a huge doll collection. Dolls of various sizes, ages, and materials. Porcelain, cloth, plastic. She even had a few vintage Barbie dolls on stands with their cat eye makeup and coiffed hair, a collection of Kewpie dolls grinning from one corner of the room, and an array of Cabbage Patch dolls old enough to have yarn hair from another. The dolls wore a broad array of clothing, too. Victorian dresses, modern skirts and blouses, nighties, clothing for every era or occasion. They were all arranged on shelves in one room of her expansive house, where she and my grandpa raised my mom and my 4 uncles. My uncles had no interest in the doll room. Living on the acreage they did, the boys were always outside playing in the woods. Since my mom was 4, she always wanted to play with her older brothers. They always said no, so she stopped asking and found interest in the doll room. She wanted to play with the dolls, but Grandma wouldn't let her. And you know how that goes for kids, and most adults really. Say, no, you can't, and the thing the kid can't do instantly becomes the most coveted and desirable. There was one doll in particular. It was a baby with an oversized head. A bonnet covered its porcelain skull. The baby had big blue eyes that remained open in a fixed stare. It wasn't like a usual baby doll. Instead of a soft body with plastic appendages attached, a cold, hard material made up her body, ceramic or porcelain. The baby wore a nightgown closed at the neck with 2 snaps. The sleeves were short and puffed at the shoulders. She didn't have hair, but there was the suggestion of hair, like a Cupid doll. Light brown paint, airbrushed on, peeked out from under the edge of the bonnet's lace and curled down onto her forehead. She had big cheeks and a little pink mouth. I think she was supposed to look like a real baby, but the material forming her head and body was too rigid to provide necessary details, like a nose with nostrils. Her nose was a bump in the middle of her face. The bonnet hid most of her head. I didn't know if she had ears, and by the time I saw what was under that bonnet, I was too horrified to pay attention to whether or not she did. It happened a few years ago, and to this day I can't stand the sight of dolls. Heaven forbid I ever have any daughters of my own. It was midsummer. Grandma had passed away. She'd been sick for a while, so it wasn't a surprise or anything. My mom asked me to help her out at the house. Her plan was to clean it out, clean it up, and move in, even though it was far too big for a single person. I've always been close to my mom. I know the real reason she wanted me there was for support, because of the doll room. Mom told me about the times she tried to play with the dolls, and the one time Grandma caught her with the baby, about to take her bonnet off. Grandma had rushed in and removed the baby from Mom's hands with slow movements reserved for catching small animals. "What have I told you about being in this room?" Grandma asked with the baby safely in her arms. Mom said she had fire in her eyes that did not match her gentle tone. "What have I told you?" Mom said the low calmness of her words, coupled with the look in her eyes, made Grandma that much scarier. Mom backed out of the room, and as she went, she heard Grandma mutter, "Never take the bonnet off. Never take it off." She hummed an unfamiliar lullaby and settled the doll back in her bassinet. When Mom was 10, she developed an aversion to that room. She told me what had happened on the 4th day in that house. Oh my gosh, I lost my place. There we go. We made excellent progress in the other bedrooms leading up to that day. I could tell Mom was avoiding the doll room at all costs. She kept her eyes averted whenever she walked past with another bag full of donations or trash. Mom came back to her brother Bobby's room, not sure why they couldn't help clean out their own crap. And I asked her, "Mom, why do you avoid the doll room?" "What? Avoid?" She laughed. "I don't avoid it." She brushed my question off with a wave of her hand. "Every time you walk past it, you look down at the floor or at the blank wall across from the doorway." I felt a little bad calling her out like that. Her lips pulled into a tight line and she touched my arm. "Let's go outside for some air," she said in a quiet voice. We went out onto the wide front porch and sat on the bottom step. "Remember how I told you the story about the baby in there?" Mom asked. "Yeah, Grandma told you to never take her bonnet off," I said. Mom shook her head and let out a long sigh. "She didn't tell me that, not directly anyway." Mom looked out over the circular driveway to a stand of aspens clustered at the center. Tears filled her eyes. I took her bonnet off. She blinked and a tear fell. "Grandma caught me with the doll after I already put it back on. I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth before." "What was under it?" I asked. "There had to be a reason she couldn't take it off, right?" Mom shook her head. "That doesn't matter," she said. "But after I took it off, from that day on, I could can hear, the baby crying, even now." She whispered the last 2 words. Tears slid down both cheeks. She stared forward, still for a few seconds before visibly shaking herself and smiling at me. She didn't wipe away the tears, almost like she didn't realize they were there. Why don't you go finish up in Uncle Bobby's room for me? She asked. I'll be up in a sec. She brushed a hand down my arm and squeezed my hand. I nodded. Sure, okay. Back upstairs, I paused in the doorway to the doll room and surveyed the shelves and floor where dolls stood, packed shoulder to shoulder. I half expected them to all turn their heads at the same time to look back at me. In the center of the back wall was the white bassinet, grayed with age and dust. I crept forward as if there was a live baby in there I didn't want to awaken, and peered down into the lacy bunting. Her glossy face peered up at me. I reached down and pulled the silk ribbon at her throat. The lace around her face loosened. I slid the bonnet off over her forehead and down the crown of her head. Mom's story had me freaked a little. Instead of just rolling her over face down on the tiny mattress and light pink blankets, I lifted her. Her body was cold, hard and cold. I turned her over when Mom gasped behind me. I dropped the baby as I whirled around, eyes wide. My mom's eyes seemed to watch the baby fall. She reached out a hand, but snatched it back to cover her face when the porcelain hit the hardwood floor and shattered. I closed my eyes. A musty smell rose from the floor. Don't look, she said in a horrified and shrieky voice. Don't look! I had to look. A strange wheezing sound came from my mom, but I had to look. Among the shards of broken porcelain and dust was a shriveled brown form with an oversized head. It curled in on itself, tiny limbs held tight against its malformed body. I backed away and hit a shelf with my shoulder. A few dolls tumbled down around me. I screamed and ran to my mom, leaping over the busted figure. She held on to me, then hauled me down the hallway by the hand, gasping and spluttering. At the bottom of the porch steps, she kept going until we reached her car. We got inside. What the hell was that? I asked. Mom looked up at the window to the doll room, through the windshield, and back at me. My sister, she said with a sob. It's my sister. That was when the crying started. The end. I hope you enjoyed that. It's really weird just talking to a camera because I can't hear like applause or laughter or shrieks of horror or anything like that. But I'll just assume that you all just adored it and loved it, and you know, me. Anyway, so the doll room. This story. One moment. This story came about. It was the first one I wrote after my concussion. This was the very first one I wrote by hand, and I was listening to a lot of podcasts while I was convalescing on the couch with a headache. And there's one called the No Sleep Podcast, which I love. It's basically short stories like The Doll Room and a lot of the stories in the book, The Doll Room, narrated by voice actors. And it's a lot of fun to listen to if you're into horror like I am. So I was laying there thinking of a story to write to submit to them, because they do take submissions from writers a lot. And for whatever reason, the thought of a baby doll with an oversized head popped into my head. And along with that was, never take her bonnet off. And that's how the doll room was born. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Moving right along, the next story I'm going to read is The Other Daughter. And Lisa Stolbaker says that she ordered a copy of the book. Thank you, Lisa. And yes, Amanda, 2020 does suck. And Jenny, no, this is not wine. It's actually room temperature, slightly tepid water to keep my vocal cords lubricated. Yes, I said lubricated. All right. The Other Daughter. "15 years since she'd gone missing, and now she stood on my front porch, unaged, still a 7-year-old girl with long blonde hair, fair skin, lips too dark to be natural, but they were, and bright blue eyes. Hi, Mommy, she said in a bright voice. I'm home. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know how. She should be in her early 20s, a woman on the verge of taking on the world. But this little girl couldn't be my daughter. She looked just like her, but it couldn't be her. Before I could stop her, she pushed her way past me and went to the kitchen where she pulled open the fridge and removed items my girl, my little Samantha, used to love for her afternoon snack. String cheese, a tube of portable yogurt, which I kept buying even after her disappearance, an apple. She climbed onto the kitchen counter, lithe dancer limbs bending and moving with effortless grace, and retrieved the jar of Nutella from the cupboard above the toaster. Mommy, can you help me with this? She held out the string cheese. She never could get the tear here slit in the top to actually tear. I took the wrapped cheese from her and opened it, handing it back with the plastic flapped down like an artificial banana peel. She pulled the cylindrical cheese from the wrapper and started pulling fine threads off of it, leaning her head back and dropping them into her mouth, just like my Samantha. I moved to the knife block and pulled a knife out of it. Let me cut this up for you, I said, moving the apple onto a cutting board. She grinned up at me. Thanks, Mommy. She got the top off the tube of yogurt and squeezed it onto a plate. My Samantha never ate it out of the tube either. With all portions of her snack on a plate, I spread Nutella on the apple slices. She pranced into the living room and set it on the ottoman. I turned on her favorite show and shuffled down the hall, hand on my forehead, the other on my chest. I paused and peeked back into the living room just to be sure. She was there, fixated on the television, munching away on her apples. She dipped the chocolate spread fruit into the yogurt. I went to the master bedroom and picked up the phone. When my husband answered, I immediately burst into tears. Honey, what is it? Is everything okay? His voice was full of worried panic. I got my sobs under control long enough to say, She's back, Steve. Our baby is back. Silence. Steve, are you there? He cleared his throat. What did you say? Samantha, she's back. I'm coming home. He arrived a few minutes later since he worked just down the street. He came inside. I stopped him at the door, but Samantha bounded down the hallway, gliding on her long legs. Daddy! She shouted. She leaped into his arms. Steve held her, his arms on autopilot, but his eyes were wide and fixed on me. I gave him a small shrug. I hadn't touched Samantha's room since she disappeared, so all her old things were still there, just as she'd left them. I went in once a month to dust, but that was all. She was delighted to find all her things, touching them in awe as if they were brand new. By the time we tucked her into bed, my heart had healed almost completely. I turned off her light and hurried to our bedroom where Steve paced. I closed the door. He turned toward me. What the hell is going on? The question warranted a louder exclamatory voice, but his was a harsh whisper, and I knew it was just something he needed to blurt out. He didn't really expect me to know the answer. Tell me how this happened. I shook my head. She was just there, on the porch. And you let her in without question? I shook my head. She just came in. Like she hadn't been missing for so long, like she forgot the code of the front door and needed me to let her inside. He paced some more. It can't be her, can it? It can't be. Diana, it can't be. But it is. I told him about our afternoon together. Every movement, every decision, everything indicated this was our girl. She should be what, 22? I nodded. We have to ask her what happened. We have to. Do we? Can't we just accept that she's home? Steve gave me a sideways look like I'd lost my mind. Can we at least wait a few days, let her get settled? Though she already had settled, it seemed. How are we going to explain this to the neighbors, our friends? Her friends are all grown up now. She'll want to see them and play with them. I didn't have answers for him. He didn't expect me to. And thankfully, as the days went by, Samantha never asked about her friends. I ordered supplies to teach her from home so we wouldn't have to worry about the school asking questions. We kept to ourselves for the first few weeks, but Steve had to know what happened. Samantha, my little love bug, he said one night while we tucked her into bed. What happened to you? Where did you go? She gave him a quizzical look. I've been here all along, Daddy. You just didn't see me. My mouth went dry, and I gulped down the cotton ball knot in my throat. Steve laughed in the friendly way he did when talking to her. No, silly. When you were gone for a long time, where were you? She still looked confused. I don't Another week went by. She was still as smart as she was before she disappeared, speeding through the second grade class materials and eager to dig into the third grade books. One night, however, after we put her to bed, instead of going to our own room on the opposite side of the house, we hung out in the living room. Giggles came from Samantha's room. Is she up again? Steve asked. I shrugged. I'll go check on her. I got up and made my way down the dark hallway, careful not to kick any of the toys she'd failed to put away earlier, despite my asking her several times. Another behavior so much like my girl from long ago. I slowly opened her door a crack. From the doorway, I could see the headboard of her bed and her bedside table. The lamp was on, but her beautiful little head was not on her pillow. I opened the door wider. The thing stood in the middle of her bed, in the center of her My Little Pony bedspread. It had a white, featureless face and two long, dangling protrusions, as if... I chuckled at myself and relaxed a bit. It was just my little Samantha wearing her old ballet tights on her head. She hummed random notes while twisting her upper body back and forth, pulling on the protrusions. What are you doing up? I asked, not in a stern voice. She froze. Her featureless face pointed in my direction. She dropped onto the mattress, butt bouncing, and slung her legs over the edge. She slid off the bed and stood. As she came nearer, I saw there were features on this blank slate of a face, but they were only the hint of features. Take those off and get back in bed, I said, heart beginning to race. I couldn't see the edge of the tights. It should have been there, just under her chin. But it all blurred into her neck and disappeared under her nightshirt. Take what off, Mommy? She asked, now twisting back and forth again, the protrusions, the legs of the tights, twirling out to the side and hitting her across the face with each half rotation. Those tights, I said, but the volume had gone out of my voice. I took a shuddering breath, and when I spoke again, the strength in my voice returned. Take them off so I can see your real face. She stopped spinning again and cocked that wretched head. Mommy, she said, this is my real face. She slowly lifted her arm, finger pointing. On the chair in the corner of the room, splayed out as if it were made of melted wax with dead alive eyes, was my Samantha's face. Blue eyes, pink lips, fair skin. And hung on the back of the chair like a golden silk scarf was her long blonde hair. The end. All right, I hope you guys liked that one too. So this story came about when I was FaceTiming with my sister, Melissa Servog, who's on the call. I saw while I was reading that she posted a bunch of the barfing emoji, which is appropriate because this story totally freaks her out. So I was FaceTiming with her, and her daughter Samantha, or Sammy, we call her Sammy, came on behind her wearing her ballet tights overhead with the protrusions hanging down. And this actually did happen because I told her to take the tights off because I wanted to see her real face. And she said, this is my real face. And it was so creepy that Wissa and I were just like, oh my God, that's horrifying. So that is where that story came from. I was like, I have to put that in a story now. And I did. And Wendy, I am so sorry that I am scaring you. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to scroll through the comments and see if I can find any questions. It looks like there's a lot of people saying that they can't sleep. Laura Kale Ammerman, I hope I pronounced that right, asked if probably the doll room was inspired by Heavy Baby, or Hev as we call her. Most likely. Bernie Sandy asks, what about clowns that repair antique clown dolls? I'll have to consider that for the next collection. Okay, let's see. My dad, Barry Brawherd, wanted to know if my sister was the other daughter. No, it was Sammy. But good guess. Okay. I'm not not seeing a lot of questions. So if you want to ask some, go ahead. Otherwise, I'll just get on to the bonus and we can call it a night. All right. If any questions come in and I wrap up before, I'll go on tomorrow and the next day and answer them in the comments. So the bonus, thank you for hanging out this long, or if you're watching this after the fact and it's posted, thanks for hanging out anyway for this long. So the bonus is a token of my utmost gratitude for you all joining me today. I have recorded one more story from the doll room. It's called Dream Hitchhiker, and you all get a free copy of it. It's in the audio version, of course. If you go to this site, clairelfishback.com/exclusive, you will get the free audio. Woohoo! I'll just hold this up for a little while, mark it down, write it down, go there right now. Whatever you want to do, just go and get your free story because I worked really hard on it and it has a really cool voice in it that I did, and you're going to love it. You're going to love it. clairelfishback.com/exclusive. Okay, I'll hold it up one more time at the very, very, very end, which just happens to be like, right now. So thank you again. It was fun. This was a really great time. And I hope you all have the sweetest of sweet dreams. Okay, bye for reals this time.